It's happening again as a Bruins insider has once again linked the Bruins to a massive trade, including Mason McTavish. We're going to be breaking down the most recent reports and why this is starting to make more and more sense as it helps out James Hagens in the future. We're going to be talking about that as well as jumping into what the return would be in such a deal. And fans are kind of split on this side of things. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have a lot to talk about here today as we're currently 30 days away before the Bruins season starts. And we have a lot to touch on in those days. You won't want to miss it. We're going to have it all here on the channel. So be sure to hit the sub button if you haven't already and you're looking for all of your Boston Bruins news. Plus, we noticed that just over 60% of you guys watching right now have not hit that button already, and we're closing in on 8K. And your sport's been absolutely phenomenal over the summer where news was not too plentiful, but we've been getting a lot of stuff out and a lot of stuff that is very interesting going forward. But we need to get straight into this video because obviously Mason McTavish is still a hot topic in the NHL, and that does not stop for the Bruins. And with this most recent update from Conor Ryan, things seem to be making a lot more sense for the Bruins to go out and make some sort of deal here. And like I said, we're going to be talking about the return here in a little bit near the end of this video, so be sure to stick around for that because I want your guys' opinion on that. But going into this, Conor Ryan first started off this going over quite a few interesting things, saying if the Bruins want to build a new core alongside the usual suspects, they're going to need to form a 1-2 punch with James Hagens, especially if 30-year-old Elias Lindholm eventually develops into more of a third center later in his career. It's easier said than done. Now, this has been one thing of concern that I feel like we've spoken about this entire offseason is what the plan is going forward with not just the Bruins and their future, but also even into this season and last year with that number one or future number one center and kind of the pairing that they could go with a 1-2 punch on that. And Mason McTavish has once again been brought into kind of speculation with this and going into it of why the Bruins would, make a bit more sense for Mason McTavish. Conor Ryan continues on, and we're going to jump into that here in a moment. But just taking a look at where the Bruins currently stand on everything right now regarding the offense, regarding the way that this team is currently structured, heading into this season at least, currently Lindholm is the number one center, but that means that he's here for this year, next year likely as well. He's going to be here for this contract, but where he plays in this roster is still yet to be determined. You're going down to Casey Mittelstadt, Pavel Zacha, two players who've been the center of attention, and Casey Mittelstadt starting to kind of ramp back up on that again. We don't know what's going to happen with those two, and especially going into a few years where James Hagens is set to join this team next year as this center that we've been waiting for, that's going to knock down at least one of these centers to put James Hagens in that role. You're not going to start him on the third pairing at least going into his first game. So there is going to be some movement regarding that, whether it is this year or next year still remains to be determined. But with that going as well, John Beecher, Sean Kuraly, are they going to be the centers of the future? And I think that's up for debate as well. And especially when you're coming down into how things are playing out and kind of the method that you would have to go and get some extra addition to this team. And that's as well what Conor Ryan broke out with here in this, saying, for the Bruins, the realistic path forward is via the draft or trade. The first option could be to secure another high draft pick, but if the Bruins, with their cupboard restocked with picks and prospects after last year's teardown, wanted more money of an established commodity, Mason McTavish could be an intriguing trade target. And going forward as well with this, the draft is an option, but right now, at least this offseason, going into this year, Mason McTavish still seems to be that number one option that is probably the easiest of the group to go out and get via a trade, even though it will cost a little bit. And like I said, we're going to touch on that here in a few moments. But going into Mason McTavish and kind of what he brings and what we could do to add to this team, McTavish is in a phenomenal spot. He's definitely going to be a player that will be a major impact no matter where. The Bruins could have that another option to steal him from the Montreal Canadiens, who really seem to be the number one linked team. But when we're looking at the draft to help out and add James Hagens, the Bruins have the picks available, but I want you to keep these in mind as well for another reason coming up here in a few minutes. But 2 first-rounders this year, one belonging to the Toronto Maple Leafs, a 2027 first-rounder from us, and another extra one, and a 2028 first-rounder, as well as just multiple other picks elsewhere that really will help out in any sort of trade that would come, or a draft pick that would come later. So the Bruins have options. Now, whether or not that means take a pick with one of those first, and you don't really know where or who could be available in those spots, especially going over the next 2 seasons. But we have an idea of where things kind of would work out regarding the Bruins pick and other teams' pick. And going into where the draft currently stands, I mean, taking a look at the projected next year's draft, when you're looking at the Bruins, Our pick is currently projected 25th. I believe the Leafs is around the mid-20 mark. So you have a pick at the top, a pick at the bottom. I feel like going into this season and going into this, interesting year, I guess we could say as well, we'll have a lot of kind of ideas of whether or not the Bruins will be a good team, a bad team, tank. I still think they're going to be a good team. I have quite a big hope on this team, and that kind of, to me at least, says that, hey, why not try and go elsewhere with these picks rather than making at least a Bruins one when you could have an option to go elsewhere. But that's something I don't think you really want to rush right now. But heading into Mason McTavish as well, on his side of things, he's currently a RFA still, offer sheet eligible, but would you rather go and offer sheet him with a price that the Anaheim Ducks could match, or would you rather go out and make a trade, work your own contract there? I think things like that certainly are in the mind of the Bruins right now, but to what extent, we don't really know, and especially coming into how Mason McTavish has been really playing over the next few years, or has played over the last few years, and will play over the next few, the contract of at least a 6x6.7 or a 3x3.9 are very feasible and could easily make things work for this Boston Bruins team, especially when you have a lot of moving parts over the next few seasons. You have quite a few players that are on deals that are quite big, that are in the market for trades, and as we mentioned, Zacha, Middlestat being really the highlights of those. But when you're coming into some other possible trade returns, this is what Conor Ryan had to say. He believes that the trade would include multiple first-round picks, as well as some prospects and NHL players, perhaps 2 first-round picks, and someone like Fraser Minten and or Matthew Poitras, among other assets, could be enough to get a deal done. Now, the article right here is putting out Fraser Minten and Matt Poitras. This isn't necessarily Conor Ryan saying this, but coming into the idea of what we would have to see from the Anaheim Ducks, who are a team that I would argue are a borderline playoff team. They're getting better. They're still very, very young, so it may not be there just yet. But getting those players in return of that style as well as picks would really fill up what they lost in Mason McTavish. So going into this kind of mindset right here makes quite a bit of sense for both parties, although the trade return that the Ducks will be getting from the Boston Bruins, in this case for me, is something that I think is a little bit too much. Maybe a Matt Poitras, I think, in a couple years' time, if things haven't worked out, you throw in a Fabian Lysell there, that may be an option. There's Georgi Merkulov, 2 of the older prospects that the Bruins have in terms of tenure in the Bruins organization, seems to be a bit of a more likely option into that sort of trade for me, but of course, that would have to depend on what the Bruins think are going to happen with them through this season, as well as what the Ducks are trying to look for in return. But as well as trading 2 first-round picks, and especially where the Bruins are a bit uncertain on their actual finishing position this year, it is a bit of a risky trade to make right now when that pick that the Bruins have could end up being, let's just say, as the NHL Tankathon saw there, a 5th overall pick. So there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of, questions behind it, but Mason McTavish still, in my mind, is a very good option. And Conor Ryan coming out with this just gives me a little bit more hope in this idea of the Bruins making a move for him here before the season starts. Now, one more thing before we do finish this one off is that Conor Ryan did come out and give his idea of a trade proposal for Boston, saying if McTavish is actually available, the Bruins likely would need to relinquish a first-round pick or 2, along with an intriguing prospect or young NHL player. There's plenty of risk involved with moving first-round picks, especially for a retooling team that could land another top 10 pick next June. And like I said a minute ago, Conor Ryan coming out here and saying that not necessarily any players in specific, but still having that exact same outline from the article, and coming into this being a very interesting and risky trade for the Bruins, but could have some serious positives coming out of this. So I want to know what you guys think about this sort of idea behind a Mason McTavish trade once again, now that we somewhat have a little bit of an idea of what the Anaheim Ducks would be asking for in return. I'm not counting in the Bruins pick this year. Not that first one, maybe the Leafs one going on the later half of the first, a future first and a player. That could be a bit more interesting in my mind, but I want to know what you guys think here in the comments below, so be sure to let me know what you think about that as well. Thank you for Conor Ryan for putting this out once again. Some phenomenal articles from him and everything on his side of things, so shout out to him. But that's all I got in this video. If you did enjoy, give it a like, hit the sub button as well. Remember, we got a lot of Bruins news coming when we're 30 days away from the NHL season, so like I said, if you did enjoy, give it a like, but I'm signing out. Thank you for watching. Hope you have a great day. See you later.